If you have questions about digital photography, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Photofocus. Here's your host, Scott Bourne.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Photofocus. Today, it's just me again. That's the way it's going to be most of the time, I'm afraid, until we decide what we're going to do with the show. We are contemplating a change in the format. We've answered a couple of thousand questions on the show so far, and we have had some suggestions on some changes. We'll be thinking about that. It's just getting harder to bring in guest hosts because everybody's schedule is so crazy. So today you're going to get answers to your photography questions, and for now you can continue to send them in to photofocusme.com. Today's show is brought to you by Adorama, more than a camera store. You can get Nikon, Olympus, and more. That's been the professional photography source since 1970, here after I graduated from high school. They've been around a long time. Check them out at adorama.com. Question number one is from Chris in Portsmouth, United Kingdom, making us internationally beloved off the bat. Chris says, I need help with group shots. I look at posed band shots. I think he means rock and roll type bands. In rock magazines, yes, often wonder what the photographer said to the band to make them give a certain look. I'm sure it was a little more than look moody. So as a photographer, what would you get them to look a certain way? Well, Chris, thank you for the question. You know, here's the thing. This is sort of like pepper to taste. I'm personally not a big fan of all the thuggish looks get off the rock bands these days. They're trying to look tough. I don't know what it is about actions that makes them think they have to look tough. Does that make their music better somehow? I think it's a cover-up. I think it means that they're not tough. I think it means they're wimps. That's usually what I think. But if you want to get a certain look, then what you need to do is you need to experiment with different ways to get people to react. For instance, you know, if you want them to natural and smile, tell good jokes. If you want them to look stunned, have a prop or show them something. I have an old friend who's done a lot of rock reporting. We're talking way back in the days of Led Zeppelin, Grand Funk Railroad, Uriah Heep, bands none of you probably heard of. And what he would do is he'd have a naked woman walk through the set as the guy's ready to get shot. He would get looks of shock and distraction and all sorts of reactions. I don't ever say anything to people to try to get them to look moody. If I were going to shoot a rock band, I wouldn't encourage them to try to look tough or moody. I would just encourage themselves. And that's the way I would encourage you, Chris, to approach this. Just don't try to duplicate what you see in all the rock magazines, and I'll tell you why. First of all, that's not you. It's somebody else. Second of all, it's happens to be the passing fad day. If you look at photos of rock groups going back 50 years, you'll see that they've gone from smiling to frowning to smiling to frowning to looking sad to looking happy to looking mean to looking tough to looking fragile to looking open to honest to whatever. Shoot people in a way that is real is my advice. Don't try to make them look a certain. Get them to be themselves. If you can do that, my friend, you will have great rock group shots. That's my opinion, and that's what you asked for. That's what you got. Thanks for writing in to the podcast. The next question comes from Roland Blay. Roland says, like you, bought an Olympus EP3. Congratulations, Roland, because I think that's a great camera. I'm sure you do too. Opinion. What's the best lens for architecture in cities and old towns? The 45mm lens is great for sure, but it's too long. The 17mm Pancake is not quite faster than the kit zoom, but it is sharper. That was a question mark. Okay, well, here's the deal. For architecture in cities, old towns, or anywhere else, I would use the Olympus EP3's 12mm lens, which has an effective focal length of 4. That is the widest lens that I think Olympus makes for that camera. It's very thin. It is super razor sharp. I've used that. It's stunning. And that is the lens that I would use if I was using the camera. Now, that said, it's not the perfect architectural camera, and here's why. Perfect architectural camera would have a tilt-shift lens or swings and tilts in a view camera, because when you're shooting architecture, many times you've got to go super wide and with some distortion, or you have the bigger problem of trying to tilt the camera up to get the build frame, which causes you to get all sorts of weird distortion. And the way we would handle it usually is with a tilt-shift lens or swings and tilts on a view camera that allow us to keep film plane, and I use the phrase film plane archaically, the where the film would go in a camera. For instance, if it did have film, the film plane has to be kept perpendicular to the subject, and then you would tilt up the lens. But the best you can do with E3, and it ain't bad, is the 12 millimeter. Just make sure to give yourself some room to crop. The distortion will come at the edges, so give yourself a little room to crop to get away from distortion. And in some cases, you may have to use the perspective or distortion correction tools in post, available in programs like Photoshop. Thanks very much for the question. It's a good one. If you have a question for the show, remember, photofocus@me.com. We can't guarantee we'll answer all your questions. If we like them, they're short and pithy, and you have a name and town in particular, you get a better chance of getting your question answered, as did Esteban Valverde in Gilbert, Arizona. Esteban says, I have the pleasure of making the photos of an older couple in their mid-70s. Do you have any suggestions on posing and lighting for a couple this age? I have one all manual, no TT flash, and umbrella that I can use off camera if suggestion will be doing this in their home. Esteban, first of all, love the way you phrase this question, because it is indeed a pleasure to make portraits in their mid-70s. This is a very sacred and sober task that you have. This is not something to take lightly, and I'm glad that you're seeking help, because folks who are in their mid-70s won't be with us forever, and you can bet that their children, grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, their friends, and other relatives will cherish these photos. Who knows, it may be the last photo ever made of this couple. So I will put everything you got into it. There's a couple of things I'd suggest. First of all, I would try some time with them before the shoot. Get to know them. Get them relaxed. Don't walk in, set up your camera, and start away. Bring the camera in, set it up, sit down, and they're probably going to offer you water or something. Just get to know them, chat, find out what they're about, and then gradually get to know what their interests are. Get them talking more and more about this. Now, the way to get this couple, Esteban, is to let them do most of the talking. So use your ears, not so much your mouth. Let talk. Let them get going about the good old days or anything that would be interesting, and go. And then slowly but surely, as that happens, start to get yourself together to make the shot and say, hey, that's great. Keep talking. I'm just going to start setting up my camera story. Keep telling it to me. Get them talking and forgetting about what you're doing. That's because folks in their mid-70s, they don't get their pictures taken a lot. They're probably not to, be totally relaxed unless you get them relaxed. That's the first step. In terms of, I can tell you this, the thing that most people in their families are going to want to see them together. So get them to be as close as you can. Get them to wrap their arms around each other. And if one, let's say that the husband's much larger than the woman, maybe you would stand behind her, wrap his arms around her. There's any number of poses. You can get cute with it. I would look at some portrait books to try to find some poses that you like. It's hard for me to make a suggestion on poses because I haven't met the couple. I don't know what kind of folks they are. If they're real lovey-dovey towards each other or real standoff toward each other, that would have an impact. But at the very least, get them close as possible in the pose. Shoot in a way that's going to be pleasing. Probably elderly. You're going to want to light the problem, so you're going to use your umbrella. Now, keep in mind that an umbrella is sort of like a light grenade. The light's going to go everywhere. So I would work fairly flat, especially with an older couple, if you want to make it look pleasing. Because the flatter the light, the more the wrinkles and such we're going to lose. There's so many ways you can go, and you ask this question to 10 photographers, they'll give you 10 answers. But based on the information I have, I would probably light this fairly close to the camera. I would keep it fairly flat. I wouldn't try to do too much fancy stuff, particularly if what you're working with is an umbrella. And I would just pay much more attention to conversation than pose and lighting, because if you get them relaxed, you're going to get a good expression when you shoot. And let me tell you, it's the truest thing. We've said it on this show before many times. Expression over perfection when it comes to a portrait every single time. Say it with me: expression over perfection, expression over perfection. You get the right expression on their face, and their entire family's go nuts when they see the picture. Now, let's say you make a 110% perfect technical photo, but the expression sucks. No one's going to want the image. So pay more attention to the expression than you are in the pose, and everything will work out fine. But I do appreciate the respect that you have for the situation. It's one that deserves it. So thanks and congratulations to you. By the way, interested in more photography tips, over at Photofocus.com, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have free advice, information, news, and reviews. It's all at Photofocus.com. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to subscribe to anything. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to give your email address. That's the way it's always been. That's the way it always will be as long as I'm in charge. So please feel free to Photofocus.com and enjoy what we have for you in the way of photography. There's tons of stuff, categories and searches. Find information on pretty much anything. Or you could just go back through the 90-something episodes of Photofocus, all the questions people have asked. Maybe your question will be there because we keep show notes for every single show. The next question comes from Robin Horn. I have a Canon 70-200 f4 non-IS that I recently discovered was sharpest around f8. Since then, I've been wondering how a 2x teleconverter would change things. I understand that when using a teleconverter, my aperture will be multiplied by 2. But since my lens is sharpest at f8 anyway, it seems like this may be a viable option for extra distance. I expect there will be a slight change in the sharpness when adding extra glass, but I'd like to hear yours on the subject and any other possible negative effects of the 2x teleconverter may have. Robin, for the 70-200 f4 non-IS lens is a very sharp lens to begin. It's one of the sleeper lenses in the Canon category. But those of you listening, I don't want you to get too hung up on particular lens. This advice would pretty much apply to any lens. A 2x teleconverter is a challenge to use. First of all, it depends a lot on the converter you're using. If you're using the new Canon 2x teleconverter Mark II, these are about $500. They're optically excellent. If you're using one of those, then I'll say Mark II or Mark III, I'm sorry, whichever the latest is, then you're going to have a lot better luck. If you're using an off-brand teleconverter, virtually nothing you do is going to work because all teleconverters just plain suck. I'm sorry. It's one of those places you cannot save photography. You need the best teleconverter you can get. Assuming you're using the top-of-the-line teleconverter, then shooting at f8 is probably going to be just fine, although I would suggest stopping down to f11 to really make sure that your teleconverter is performing at its best. The thing you got to know about using a teleconverter is it does reduce the possibility of additional flare, contrast loss, etc., and going to have to get used to the fact that you're working at 400 millimeters at the furthest distance, and what's going to happen is basically you're going to just magnify all the imperfections that are already there. So probably shoot that particular combo between f8 and f11. I would assume that you'll just need some tests. You can easily do this with a newspaper. Put a newspaper up on the wall with a single light, back the lens off so that it's further than its minimum focusing distance. Take a picture of the newspaper at every stop with the teleconverter on, and you'll see where it's sharpest. That's the best way to do these kinds of things, folks. You can read about this stuff on the Camera Club forums all day long, but in your particular, you'll get the best results. And if that's what you want, the best results, then do the test yourself. On me or anybody else, do the test yourself because your specific camera, your specific lens, specific teleconverter, etc., may be different than mine. They all suffer from lack of or change in quality control to some extent. One lens may be slighter than another. Now we're talking in a matter of a few percentage points. But you could, and I think extremely rare, but you could have, for instance, a camera with back focus, etc., excuse me, cases, do the test yourself. That's what I suggest. Great question. Thanks very much. And before we take the next one, I want to tell you about something very exciting from Animoto that ends on the last of December. It's this month only. Buy 1 year of Animoto Plus and receive 3 extra months. Animoto Plus is in between Animoto Pro and regular Animoto, and all about it by clicking on the banner on the Photofocus homepage. There's a little video that tells you what it's all about. But you'll save buku bucks because you're getting 3 months extra a year. This is a special one-time offer. If you hear this show after December 2000, don't bother because this deal is gone. It's only for my audience. It is for Animoto Plus, which is a very nice product at Animoto. It helps you use slideshows to make amazing slideshows. This expires 12/30/2011, and here's the code you need: Photo DEC, DEC, or Photo December, Photo DEC. You use that code, this only, and you get 3 months free. Thanks to Animoto for their great support of Photofocus. The next question comes from Helen Small in Orlando, Florida. I hate to sound like it, but I am a newbie. What the heck does telephoto mean, as in telephoto lens? Hey, don't ever apologize for not knowing something about photography. We appreciate all questions, Helen, including ones. Telephoto, it's not a big deal. All it means, it's a special type long focus lens. It means the physical length of the lens is shorter than the focal length. It's accomplished by using a bunch of groups. There's a lot of science and technology behind it, but basically it just means you'll be narrowing the field of view. So a normal lens, might have a fairly wide field of view. Let's say, 180 degrees. This would narrow the field of view to somewhere between 10 and 30 degrees. The longer the telephoto lens, the narrower the field of view, meaning how much you see from side to side. So all a telephoto lens does is it narrows the field of view, it zooms in, it makes it look like you got closer to something. One of the cool of a telephoto lens is that it compresses the distance between the camera and the lens, and it creates interesting visual effects. So, for instance, if you have a field of flowers and there's one flower all by itself, one singular flower a mile in front of the other field of flowers, shoot that from far away with a telephoto lens, it'll make it look like the two fields of flowers are very close together. It's also very flattering in portraits when you're working with larger people. If you use a telephoto lens, it tends to be more flattering. So that's all it is. No big deal. We appreciate the question. You can sell me here at Photofocus anytime you want. Not everybody has been around photographer, and the new folks got just as much right to ask questions as the old folks. Thanks so much. The next question comes from Keith Killigrew in Worcestershire, England. And yes, this is the home of Worcestershire sauce. I love Worcestershire sauce. Keith, thank you. I use a Canon 400D and shoot mainly JPEGs when shooting wildlife, motorsports, etc. for faster buffer recovery. I also shoot RAW when it's more suited to the subject. I'm always hearing about shooting to the right on the history. Is this method applicable in JPEG as well as RAW? No. No, it's not. Keith, thanks for the question. If you're shooting JPEG, you want to shoot spot on. You want to make the most perfect exposure you can. In the old days when we paid 5 cents a slide and we shot slide film and there was no Photoshop, it was just what you got. Remember that saying? What you shot was what you got. When you use slide film, you had to be spot on. Well, that would be when you're shooting JPEG too. Because while you can adjust JPEG, you don't have as much range to work with, as much data to work with, and all the settings are baked in when you make the shot. Shooting to the right when you shoot RAW is designed to give you as much data to work with in your RAW as possible. And while it may appear to be overexposed on the camera's CD or LED, then that doesn't matter, because when you get it into post, you adjust the exposure according to what you need to get the best looking image. And it's better to have too much data than not enough. If you have that histogram all blocked up on the left side, that got all the shadows, you don't have any highlight data, and there'll be nothing there when you go to when it comes to highlights. If you have too much highlight data, though, you overexpose, it's not good either. So you want to find a happy medium. Generally just push it up as far as you can to the right without going past that 255 number, because at 56, it's just like the Constitution. It's history. There's nothing there. It's equivalent blank slide film. So shoot to the right with RAW, shoot spot on, the most perfect picture you think you can find when you're shooting JPEG. That way you won't have to worry about it. That's the way to go. Excuse me. Next question comes from Elliot M. Bay. It's in Massachusetts. Elliot says, I've heard you talk about using a bean bag when you photograph birds. Bag? Like you buy at the store? How does that work? Sorry if this sounds stupid. Well, it doesn't sound stupid. It's a legitimate question, Elliot. If you've never shot, with photography, you wouldn't know this, but it's not exactly a beanbag like you buy at the store. Although the lima beans or the pinto beans or whatever you use to fill the beanbag can be bought at any store. Typically, the way this works is a lot of companies will sell you a beanbag, and what it is, it's a cloth bag with a zipper. You open it up, you fill it with the beans of your choice to make it easy to transport. And then you lay this beanbag over your car door, is what I do, or your car hood, or any place you want to steady your camera lens on a tripod. What I do is I drive around a place like Bosque del Apache, New Mexico. Visit the blog at photofocus.com or the website at photofocus.com and search Bosque, Bouque. You'll see many posts that I've written from this place. I've gone there dozens of times. Well, not dozens. I guess I should say 19 to be exact. I've been there a lot and frequently be seen driving around the refuge with my big 600 or 800 millimeter pointed out the window of my car, resting on a beanbag. And this is because the birds are afraid of the car. They're afraid of us. If you get out of the car, if you stand there, you'll flush the birds. They'll fly away. They'll be scared. However, for whatever reason, the birds' stars are blind. They're not bothered by it. So you can roll up with your car most of the time. With the exception of the very young sandhill cranes. They are scared by cars, by the way. I have no idea why. But most of the birds, it's just a car, no worries. We can sit here. So you pull up on a spot. You see the bird. You've got your lens out the window. You start shooting. You're not disturbing anything or anybody. The bird's fine. You're fine. And it steadies the lens so that you don't vibration. It just makes it easier to work. And by the way, turn the car off. That helps with the vibration. Lots of people turn the car off. Turn the car off and shoot away. So these bean bags cost anywhere between $50 and $250. I use a variety of different brands. I don't think there's particularly one over. The bigger and bulkier they are, the more I like them because they provide more support. And search photography beanbag on your favorite search engine. I have no doubt that you will find many for sale and much more information about them. I do appreciate the question. I think it's a reasonable one given the fact that not everybody shoots with a beanbag. Thank you. Let's take just a very quick moment to mention a company that I am particularly proud to have here on the Photofocus podcast, and that is Tenba. If you have ever seen me at a photo trade show, you've probably seen this kind of bright orange messenger bag that I have over my shoulder. It's probably got my laptop, maybe a camera or two, or a lens or a flash, some papers, whatever in it. And I've been carrying these bags long before I was ever sponsored by Tenba. They're great bags. They're sort of like briefcases, but they all double as photo bags. I've had one fall out of the overhead in an airplane because a guy pushed it out, and no damage to my laptop or my camera. So check it out, the messenger bags. There's a cool video you can see if you go to photofocus.com. Click on the Tenba messenger banner that you see there on the site, and you can get more information. All right, let's take a question from Colonel Duke in Anaheim, California. Seems like regardless of how special it is to me, a name or a title for it never jumps out at me. How critical is naming art for art sales or portfolio use? Any suggestions for naming? Well, I have trouble with this too, my friend. The name of the image does matter. I don't think it should at all, but it does. When you're dealing with the beanie-wearing fine art types, they love to get into this stuff. The name is important. You've got to have the whole conversation about the name. I tend to find the names for my that go to fine art I tend to be very literal. For instance, Cranes in the Fire Mist, one of my more famous images. It's a bunch of cranes standing in some mist and a fiery orange, so I called it Cranes in the Fire Mist. No big deal. I think if I had a question how to name is be true to yourself, and unless you're super artsy, don't try to sound artsy-fartsy, just be literal. So describe what's going on. And some of the more famous photographs of all time are named stuff like Trees Number 7. It's not a big deal. I would spend very little time worrying about if it were me. It's more important if you live in that world of the fine artists, but very few of us do. If you want to get some help, sometimes ask your friends what they think. But I wouldn't spend much time on it. Give it a name, write it on, stick with it. That's important. Don't change the name, because then you get in all kinds of trouble. But pick a name, write it down, move on. Life is too short, and there are many more things to worry about, in my opinion. The next question is kind of a long one. I'll try to parse through it. It's from Gary Jones in Orange Park, Florida. Gary used his camera to take pictures of swinging ballroom dancers in a dark nightclub environment. They dance around a lot. That sounds like it's tough. He's got a Canon 1D Mark III, a 24-105 f4, and a 580 EX flash. Don't let that stop you. Don't stop listening if you're not a Canon user, because what I'm going to say will apply to you too. He's using ISO 500, aperture 7 to help with focusing errors, and I guess that has to do with he wants more depth of field. The shot 1/40th for a little ambient light. He said he's tried higher shutter speed up to 1/25th, focus set to AI servo. The flash is set to TTL. He's relying on the flash to freeze. The short and pithy question is, after that long and not short and pithy question is, what recommend you give to improve your sharp focus keeper ratio? All right, Gary, you need more speed in that environment. If the dancers are moving around at a 40th of a second, relying on the flash only, that's going to be problematic. I would, first of all, start to think about a faster lens. The 24-105 4 in that environment, I'm thinking it's just not fast enough. Maybe you can't afford to rent a 24-70 or a 70-200 2.8 from my friends lenses.com. Try that. The other thing I would suggest is multiple flashes. The 5EX flash and many other flash systems, including the SB900s from Nikon, etc., can sync with each other. Put a couple of flashes high on poles that mount near the area where the dancers will be. Put some umbrellas on them, which turns into grenades and throws light everywhere, so you have lots of light to work with. And then trigger them from your camera position. That will help you get a lot more light. Your problem with focus is all tied to the fact that you're working in low light. I mean, and there's no magic bean. Fortunately, if there were, I'd be putting them all in my pocket. You've got to get more light, and you've got to get better speed. Those are the two things you're going to need to get yourself. You might cheat a little down on the aperture. I don't think you need to shoot at 7.1. I can learn to shoot, wide open. I've shot wide open in these environments. The focusing is good on these cameras if there's enough light. So I would try to shoot f2.8 to f4, and I would have more light on the subjects. That's the main thing I would do, and I hope that helps. Maybe someone else has a different idea, but if it were me, that's what I would do, and I'd like to think that would work. All right, the next question from Sam James in Los Angeles, California. Why are you always talking about sliders when you talk about shooting video with your DSLR? Now, those of you who are really old, or not so old but live near a White Castle, will think that maybe I'm talking about hamburgers. I'm not. A slider is a device that allows your camera to move from side to side, like a dolly. And when you're shooting video, it's hard for us photographers to get our arms wrapped around this, but the deal is that video is about motion pictures, moving things. And we're used to locking our camera on tripods and getting a still shot, but that doesn't work in video. When I first started shooting video on cameras, it's just a static shot. And if you look at movies, you'll see the cameras always move on a boom, it's on a jib, it's on a dolly, it's on a slider. So a slider is just something you use to move your camera from one side to the next. There's all kinds of ways to do it. You can make your own for about $100 out of some PVC pipe, or maybe even less than $100. Or you can buy a real fancy one like those from Cinovate, or, I use the Philip Bloom Pocket Dolly, which is really just a slider that has all kinds of cool capability. It's very expensive on me. But that's what I'm talking about, Sam. I'm talking about being able to move the camera from side to side when I'm doing a video shot, so it's not a boring static shot. That's what it is. Thanks for the question. I did mention borrow lenses earlier. I just want to throw out that anytime you hear me talk about gear you're not familiar with, and you're thinking, maybe I should buy one of those, but they've got sliders. They've got everything. call them up or visit borrowlenses.com. You can click on the banner on the Photofocus.com site to get there. And just go to borrowlenses.com. We don't have any kind of affiliate deal with them. But just go check it out. They probably rent it, and you can rent it to decide if you need it, if you would actually use it, if you want to buy it. Check it out, borrowlenses.com. We appreciate their support of Photofocus. Here comes a question from William at Chicago, Illinois. Is it possible to shoot with a 600 or even 800 millimeter lens handheld? It is possible if you are Godzilla. William, I can't shoot handheld with a 600 or an 800. I've got a couple decent shots. I'd say one really great shot with the 600 handheld. It wasn't so much handheld as I laid down on the ground and used the ground to help support it. I didn't have it on a tripod or a gimbal head. Usually would, but I can't do it. I know people who do. There's a guy named Jim Knight who's a great bird shooter who works at the 500 and 600 millimeter range handheld. He's got Mr. Monster guns on him. And if you're a younger man, William, and you've got big biceps and big strong forearms, maybe you can do it. But I'm old and I can't. And I use a tripod and a gimbal head, and that's the only way you'll see me using a 600 or an 8 lens. But, technically it is possible. I don't think it's possible for 80% of the population to do well. So I hope that answers your question. Dave Davenport at photofocus@me.com and says, sorry if you've had this question before, but do you use Mac or Windows? And as a photographer, matter. Okay, thanks, Dave. Here comes the hell, no matter how I answer this. But most people know me know I'm a diehard Mac guy. Don't use Windows. I don't get Windows, don't like Windows. But I'll say this about Windows. Actually, my friends who use the newer versions of it, they have sorted out Windows pretty well these days. And all the professional photographers I know that use Windows aren't having any issues at all. I don't think it matters much anymore. I will say that Macs have been built with, with photography in mind, sort of. And Photoshop was built to run on Macs. If you want to use Apple, you have to get a Mac, and I'm an Aperture guy. But if everybody, here's the way I always answer this question these days. If everybody around you uses Windows, buy Windows. If everybody uses Macs, buy Macs. And the reason I say that is because your friends will all help you and know what to give you their opinion on what works. And if you buy a Mac and they have all got Windows machines, they're going to shrug their shoulders, kind of know what to say, or vice versa. There is a lot of help online, but most of the stuff online is from anonymous forums, and I don't generally respect it or believe it. I would rather talk to somebody I know. So pick whichever one you want. I think it's a myth that the Mac is dramatically more expensive. Pound for pound, if you're buying name brand stuff, they're about the same. The Mac is a little more expensive, particularly than some of the off brands, but for me, it's always been worth it. I've had Macs all my life, and that's the way I will die, a Mac guy. So good luck, and send your cards and letters to somebody else, because I'm really not interested in the fanboyism on either of this issue. I'm just answering the poor guy's question. Thank you. All right. Keith Williams from London, United Kingdom says, when you mount your camera and long lens to a tripod, do you remove the camera strap? I'm worried about it flapping in the wind. As well you should be, Heath. That's a great, great question. Here's the deal. If I'm not lazy, then yes, I remove my camera strap. Occasionally I'm lazy and I leave it on. It can be a distraction. It can whip around, hit you in the face, which I've had happen, and it hurts. It can get caught in front of the eyepiece. It's generally not obviously not to keep a camera strap on a camera that's mounted to a tripod. Other than I've had a friend who, for safety's sake, will mount the camera strap around their neck, even though the camera's on the tripod, just in case there's a tragedy and the camera comes off the tripod. That is probably the very safest go. But it's also a bit inconvenient. So, yeah, most of the time, my cameras don't have apps on them. And that's because my cameras spend most of their lives on tripods, and I don't need a strap when I'm carrying it on the tripod. I lock everything down very tightly, throw the shoulder, and carry it around. That's not a best practice. I'm not recommending it, but that's the way I do it. That's the truth. So, there you go. One more sponsor to mention, Smug Mug Professional Photoing. Smug Mug Pro. Now, if you want to sell photos to people and you want to do it online, I recommend Smug Mug Pro. And I also recommend them for video. They've hosted all the Photofocus video for years. They're the best video host period, in my opinion. Check them out at smugmug.com. You can click on the banner on the photofocus.com site to get there if you want. We appreciate their support. Smug Pro, if you want to sell your photos online, that's the way to do it. Alex Penn from Toronto, Ontario, writes to photofocus@me.com and says, I am new to portraiture and have heard that it's not have the subject shadow on your background. How do you avoid that problem? In my first few test shots, the shadows are very strong. Alex, it's a general best practice not to have the subject shadow on the background. I'm phrasing it this way so I don't get tons of email from people that say, I put the shadow on the background. It's artistic. That's fine. If you want it there, put it there. But the general best practice is not to have the shadow on the background. And the way to avoid it is very simple. Put distance between the subject and the background. Depending on how harsh your lights, the direction of the lights, and how bright they are, 6 to 8 feet should do it. 6 to 8 feet off the back should get the shadow off the background. But the easiest way to test this is just make a couple of tests. Get your screen on the back of the camera, see if you see a shadow on the background. If you do, it means the subject is too close to the background. Now, if you don't have the room to move the subject off the background, then you have to reposition the lights so they're not as direct and that they fall off the background, that they're softer and they fall off faster. This becomes more issue then, and it's a little more tricky. But generally, the best way to do this, Alex, is just move the subject further away from the back. We have time for one more question here on the Photofocus podcast. We're here the 5th, and the 25th of every month. And yes, we will be here Christmas Day on the 25th. If you're bored, you're sitting around your football or whatever, listen in because we will have a show then. Here's the question. On this show, we will end with, why do Epson and other companies tout their acid-free for photo printing? Is this something I should be concerned with? Well, acid-free, Scott, it's a phrase that says it's archival in nature, as archival as it can be in any event. It means that there are no harmful brighteners or acids in the paper that will eat in years from now. And in theory, now, obviously, we don't have 100 years on these photo papers to know they'll last that long, but there's a man named Wilhelm who runs a company that has pioneered some testing that will give us an idea how long these papers will last, and the ones that don't have acid last longer. So that's something you should be concerned with if you have prints that you hold handed down as heirlooms. Now, if you're just making 4x6s to pass around to your friends and they're going to go in a scrapbook and be forgotten about in a few years, I wouldn't worry so much about it. But all of my printing is done on acid papers, and anybody that's a serious printer tends to do that. So that's what that's all about. We appreciate the question. We've ever had that question on the show, and I always like it when we get brand new questions. Thank you very much. So that's all the time we have for this edition of Photofocus. So glad that you tuned in. We'll be back here in days. And remember what I always say, go out there and make pictures. Don't just take pictures. We'll see you on the next Photofocus.